She was a looker. And she had a strange, mad kind of sensibility that knew something, which was this, that most human beings just aren't worth a shit. And I felt that, and she felt it. So we had a working ground to work upon. That's all. Anything else?
The thing is, he kept going. You know, he would get jobs, enough to keep a room, as long as he could stand a job. And he'd go on. And it was interesting, he finally did get that post office job and worked there for so many years. That was very stable for anybody to work in one place for that long. What was it, 11 years in the post office, and then he carried for a year and a half, carried mail.
I'd see him occasionally. Maybe I wouldn't see me every day, but he'd be on his way going, and maybe he'll stop and say something, and maybe not. On one occasion, he did, I said, what in the world he's given me? And it was a poem. And I wished I had it now, but I don't know what in the world I did with it. Just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I threw it away because I didn't think I'd ever need it. Now I wished I had it. Isn't that something? But he'd stop and say things that maybe somebody else wouldn't, you know. And had sort of a personality. We didn't have too many whites in the post office at all. And you could tell them because, and it was really kind of, maybe I shouldn't say this, but they were kind of weird, you know, weirdos. And I said, well, how come all the white guys are so weird, you know?
It was a tiresome job, mechanical, all night long. I think it was 3 to 11 or 4 to 12, one of those shifts. He would worry about a new set of hemorrhoids. You see, he worked sort of half sitting, half leaning on a stool. And one of his best stories, actually, is from hemorrhoids acquired sticking mail when he was working for the post office.
They had a procedure called the scheme right after postal codes became ubiquitous. And they would put a man in more or less a plastic cage on a stool with a case in front of him and a stack of mail. And within a certain amount of time, they had to, what they call throw, which means place the envelope in the proper pigeonhole, according to the postal code, within a certain amount of time. And if they failed the scheme, they were out. You would lose your job, you would lose your pension, you would lose your retirement. And Bukowski often told me that this scheme was killing him, that when he would get off his stool and leave this plexiglass booth, there'd be a puddle of sweat on the floor.
It's harder than schoolwork. When you were coming in school class, to pass one of those schemes in postal back in those days, it was harder than any school test exam
that you've ever had.
We had to learn all the carriers, his routes, everything. And you had to be on the ball. If you flunked, they get rid of you. You had to pass the scheme to retain your job.
Well, I took the scheme sheet and I related everything to sex and age. This guy lived in this house with 3 women. He belt whipped one. Her name was the name of the street and her age the brake number. He ate another, ditto, and he simply screwed the third old-fashioned, ditto. There were all these fags, and one of them, his name was Manfred Avenue, was 33 years old, etc., etc., etc. I'm sure they wouldn't have let me into that glass cage if they had known what I was thinking as I looked at all those cards. They all looked like old friends to me. Still, I got some of my orgies crossed. I threw a 94 the first time. 10 days later, when I came back, I knew who was doing what to whom. I threw 100% in 5 minutes and got a form letter of congratulations from the city postmaster.
My father needed to write more than, anything else in his life almost. And between working at the post office and having a wife, or they weren't married, but the equivalent as far as your lifestyle, and a young baby that would be crying when he was working all night and then he couldn't sleep in the daytime. It was brutal for him, even though he didn't try and reject my mother or reject me as a result. And she was the one that just said, I'm looking for an apartment. I have to move out. And he said, okay, I'll help you.
I told him that if he wanted to leave the post office and write full time, we'd figure out what kind of a budget he would need. So we sat down in this little apartment, somehow found space on a crowded coffee table to even add up figures on a paper. And to my astonishment, we came up with a figure of $100 that included $15 a month child support, $30 a month rent, the rest for food and cigarettes and beer and gasoline. So I told him if he would take the chance, I would too, and I was making maybe $100 a week at that time, that I would give him 25% of everything I earned for the rest of my life, with a minimum of $100 if he would take the chance. And so he turned in his resignation at the post office, and we started out.
You realize 10 years ago I was a postal clerk down at Alameda Street, sticking letters into slots like this. Within 10 years, I'm published in Germany, Norway, France, Holland, Italy, England, more. I can't name 6 or 7 more. What happened?
The fruits of his fame was coming to him. They were knocking on his door. Go to bed with me. He was going on poetry readings. He had women wanting to go to bed with him on those poetry readings. He was a star. So it was hard for him to say no, to these things. Hard for any man, right?
The place didn't look bad. She had huge thighs and a very good laugh. She laughed at everything, and the curtains were yellow, and I finished, rolled off. And before she went to the bathroom, she reached under the bed and threw me a rag. When she came out, she bent over, and I saw all that behind as she put Mozart on. That happened to you, huh, buddy?
I walked up to him after the reading and says, "You don't like women very much, do you?" And he says, "Oh yeah, I like women." No, I think he liked women, but because of his acne and stuff when he was young, he hadn't. I don't think he had a lot of confidence in himself, even though he was real personable. Once you got beyond this exterior thing.